The dust never settled in Abilene. It hung in the air like a curse, coating everything in a film of grit and sorrow. Henry Clay knew this dust better than most. At 8 years old, he had learned to read its patterns, to know when the Mackenzie Gang rode from the north by the way it swirled clockwise, or when the Dalton Boys approached from the south by its lazy drift toward the saloons. Henry lived nowhere and everywhere. After the fever took his mama 2 winters past, and his father disappeared into a bottle before vanishing altogether, the boy became a ghost in his own town. He slept in the stable loft at Morrison's, earned pennies sweeping floors at the general store, and survived on the kindness of townsfolk, too weary to offer much, but too decent to let him starve completely. The town itself was dying, strangled by the war between 2 gangs that had turned Abilene's main street into a no-man's land. The Mackenzie Gang controlled the north end, rough cattlemen who had turned to robbery when the drought killed their herds. The Dalton Boys owned the south, former Union soldiers who never learned to put down their guns. Between them, decent people cowered, shops closed early, and hope dwindled like water in a desert canteen. Henry watched it all from the margins. He saw Mrs. Patterson cry when the Mackenzies smashed her store window during a shootout. He witnessed old Doc Morrison patch up members of both gangs, his hands shaking, knowing he could be shot for helping the wrong side. The boy understood something the adults had forgotten. Everyone was afraid. The gang members, the shopkeepers, even Sheriff Borden, who spent more time hiding in his office than keeping peace. On a Tuesday morning in July, Henry woke in the stable loft with a pain in his belly that would not quit. He had felt poorly for days, but ignored it, the way he ignored hunger and cold and loneliness. But this morning the pain bent him double. He tried to climb down the ladder and fell, landing hard on the stable floor. Morrison found him an hour later, curled in the hay, his face pale as milk. The old stablekeeper carried the boy to Doc Morrison's office, his own brother shouting for help. Doc took one look and knew: the appendix. It needed to come out, and soon, or the boy would die. But Doc Morrison had a problem. He was 70 years old with hands that shook from palsy. He could set bones and stitch cuts, but surgery, he needed help. He needed young Dr. Sarah Chen, who had arrived in town 3 months ago and set up practice in the South End, Dalton territory. Doc Morrison's office sat firmly in Mackenzie territory. "I will go get her," Morrison said, reaching for his hat. "They will shoot you before you cross Main Street," Doc replied, his voice hollow. "The Daltons think anyone from our end is a spy. And if Sarah comes here, the Mackenzies might not let her leave. She is too valuable to them." They stood there, 2 old men, watching a child suffer because grown men with guns had divided a town so completely that even mercy could not cross its borders. Henry drifted in and out. In his fever dreams, he saw his mother singing while she hung laundry. He saw his father, sober and smiling, lifting him onto a horse. He saw Abilene as it used to be, before the gangs, when neighbors helped neighbors and the church bell rang on Sundays, calling everyone together. When he woke, Mrs. Patterson was there, holding his hand. She had brought water and cool cloths for his forehead. Behind her stood others: Mr. Chen from the laundry, Miss Abigail who taught school, young Thomas who worked at the bank. They had all come when they heard, drawn by the plight of a boy who belonged to no one and therefore belonged to everyone. "We have to do something," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice fierce with determination. "We cannot let this child die because of their foolish war. What can we do?" Miss Abigail asked. "Neither gang will listen to us." Henry's hand moved weakly, gesturing toward the window. When Mrs. Patterson leaned close, he whispered, his voice thin as paper. "They are all afraid. Just like me, tell them. Tell them I am not their enemy. Tell them I need help." It was such a simple thing, a child's understanding of a complex problem. But sometimes, simple truths cut through complexity, like a knife through cloth. Mrs. Patterson stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "Then we tell them. We tell both of them. If they want to shoot an unarmed woman pleading for a child's life, let that be on their conscience. She walked out into the street, into the space between territories, and she began to speak. Her voice carried in the hot stillness. She told them about Henry, about a boy who swept their floors and slept in their stables, who never took sides because he had no side to take. She told them he was dying, and that only by working together could they save him. The Mackenzie Gang appeared first, 5 men on horses, hands near their weapons. Then the Daltons emerged from the south, matching them in number and suspicion. The 2 groups faced each other across Mrs. Patterson, who stood alone in the dust, her hands clasped before her. "This boy," she said, pointing back toward the doc's office, "is dying. He needs surgery, and he needs it now. Doc Morrison is too old to do it alone. Dr. Chen has the skill but cannot cross to help him. You can shoot each other tomorrow if you must. But today, right now, let her pass. Let her save this child." The silence stretched like taffy, thin and dangerous. Jake Mackenzie sat on his horse, a bear of a man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw. Across from him, Captain Dalton stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his Confederate gray coat faded to almost nothing, but still worn like armor. These 2 men had been trying to kill each other for nearly a year. "The boy," Jake Mackenzie said slowly, his voice like gravel, "that is the one who sleeps in Morrison's stable?" "The same one who brings me water when I am fixing wagon wheels in the heat," added Tom Dalton, one of the captain's younger men. "Never asks for nothing. Just brings it and disappears. Something shifted." These hardened men, who had forgotten how to be anything but enemies, suddenly remembered a small kindness. A cup of water. A floor swept without being asked. A boy who smiled even though he had every reason not to. Captain Dalton looked at Dr. Chen, who had emerged from her clinic and now stood behind his men. She was young, barely 30, with steady hands and steely determination. She had come west to escape an arranged marriage in San Francisco and found herself trapped in a different kind of war. "You can do this surgery?" he asked her. "With Doc Morrison's help, yes," she replied. "But we need to move quickly. Every minute we waste is a minute the child suffers." Jake Mackenzie spat in the dust. "If this is a trick, if you are using the boy to position your people—" "For God's sake, Jake," Mrs. Patterson interrupted, her patience finally breaking. "Look at us. Do we look like we are positioning anything? We are shopkeepers and schoolteachers. We just want to save a little boy. If you cannot find humanity enough for that, then you are already dead inside." The words hung in the air. Mrs. Patterson had lived in Abilene for 30 years, had buried a husband and raised 3 children here. She had earned the right to speak truth, and both gangs knew it. "We let her go to Morrison's," Captain Dalton said finally. "We give them until sunset. No one crosses Main Street except the doctor and whoever she needs. After sunset, things go back to how they were." "Agreed," Jake Mackenzie said. He looked at his men. "Any of you has a problem with saving a kid, you can ride out now." No one moved. Dr. Chen walked across Main Street with her medical bag, accompanied by Mrs. Patterson and Miss Abigail. Both gangs watched, hands still near their weapons, trust as fragile as spun glass. When she reached Doc Morrison's office, she paused and looked back. "Thank you," she called out. "All of you." Then she disappeared inside. The surgery took 3 hours. During that time, something strange happened in Abilene. People emerged from their homes and businesses. They stood in the street, in that neutral space that had been too dangerous to occupy for months. Mackenzie men and Dalton Boys stood at their respective ends, but they did not shoot. They waited. Mr. Chen brought coffee from his laundry and offered it to the Daltons. After a moment's hesitation, they took it. Morrison brought water for the Mackenzie horses. Young Thomas started sweeping the street just to have something to do with his hands. Others joined him. Inside the office, Dr. Chen worked with Doc Morrison's guidance. The old man's hands were too unsteady for the delicate work, but his knowledge was invaluable. He talked her through each step while she made the incisions, found the inflamed appendix, and carefully removed it. Henry remained unconscious, breathing shallow but steady. Will he live? Morrison asked when it was done. "If infection does not set in, yes," Dr. Chen replied, washing her hands. "He is strong for one so small." He has had to be. When she emerged from the office, the sun was lowering toward the horizon. The street was cleaner than it had been in months. People stood everywhere, and the line between territories seemed less sharp somehow. "The boy lives," Dr. Chen announced. "He will need care and watching, but he should recover." A cheer went up, spontaneous and genuine. For a moment, Abilene remembered what it felt like to be a community instead of a battlefield. Captain Dalton walked forward, stopping just short of the invisible line. Jake Mackenzie did the same from his side. They stood 10 feet apart, these two enemies, and looked at each other. "Tomorrow," Captain Dalton said. "Tomorrow," Jake agreed. But neither man sounded certain. Something had changed, some small crack in the wall of hatred that had divided them. If you want to hear what happened next in Abilene, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Henry's story is just beginning, and the real miracle has yet to unfold. Henry woke 3 days later to find the world transformed. He lay in a real bed at Mrs. Patterson's house, where she had insisted he recover. Through the window he could hear something he had not heard in months: laughter, children playing in the street. When he was strong enough to sit up, Mrs. Patterson told him everything: how Dr. Chen had saved him, how both gangs had agreed to the truce, how that sunset had come and gone, and nobody had gone back to war. "They are saying you are a miracle," Mrs. Patterson said, adjusting his pillows. "They are saying you brought peace to Abilene." "I did not do nothing," Henry whispered. "I just got sick. Sometimes that's all it takes, child. Sometimes people need a reason to remember their humanity." But it was more than that, and Henry would come to understand it in the days that followed. The truce had held through sunset, then through the night, then through the next day. Not because of any official agreement, but because once people saw their enemies show mercy, it became harder to see them as enemies at all. Jake Mackenzie came to visit Henry on the 5th day. The big man stood awkwardly in Mrs. Patterson's parlor, his hat in his hands, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I brought you something," he said gruffly, holding out a carved wooden horse. "Made it myself." "Figured a boy should have a toy." Henry took it with wonder. He had not owned a toy since before his mama died. "Thank you, sir." "Jake," the man said. "You can call me Jake." He sat heavily in a chair. "I want you to know something, boy. When your mama died, I was the one who paid Doc Morrison to treat her. Did not help none, the fever was too strong, but I tried. I knew your pa before the drink got him." "He was a good man once," Henry stared. "You knew them." "This town was not always like this," Jake said. "We all knew each other once. Then the drought came, and the cattle died, and men got desperate. Me and the captain, we were friends before the war. Can you believe that? Fought on different sides, and when we both came back here, we could not let it go. Kept fighting a war that was already over." He stood, placing his hand briefly on Henry's shoulder. "You getting sick, needing help, it reminded us of something. Reminded us we are all just trying to survive out here. Maybe it is time we tried surviving together instead of apart." After he left, Captain Dalton came. Then Tom Dalton. Then others from both sides. They all came to see the boy who had needed them more than they needed to hate each other. 2 weeks after the surgery, Henry was strong enough to walk. Mrs. Patterson had arranged for him to stay with her permanently, giving him the room that had belonged to her son, who moved to California. On his first day out of bed, Henry walked down Main Street and saw something impossible. The Mackenzie Gang and the Dalton Boys were working together. They were rebuilding the fence around the schoolhouse that had been destroyed in a shootout months before. Jake and the captain worked side by side, not speaking much, but not fighting either. "Henry," Miss Abigail called, waving from the schoolhouse steps. "Come see what we are planning." The school had been closed for 3 months. Now it was opening again. Miss Abigail showed him the classroom, the desks that had been repaired, the books that had been donated. "We will have 20 students," she said. "Maybe more. People are staying instead of leaving. Families are coming back." "Because of the truce?" Henry asked. "Because of hope," she replied. "You gave us that, Henry. You showed us that some things are more important than our differences. That Sunday, for the first time in over a year, the church bell rang. People came from all over Abilene, filling the pews. Jake Mackenzie sat on one side. Captain Dalton sat on the other. They did not sit together, but they were in the same room, under the same roof, listening to the same sermon about forgiveness and community. Henry sat with Mrs. Patterson, the wooden horse Jake had carved in his pocket. He thought about what the big man had said, about how they had all known each other once. Maybe that was the secret. They had not become different people. They had just forgotten who they were. After the service, the town held a gathering in the square. There was food and music, and for the first time in forever, people celebrated together. Henry walked through the crowd, still weak but growing stronger every day, and he saw something beautiful. He saw the laundryman's daughter dancing with one of the Mackenzie boys. He saw Morrison sharing a drink with a Dalton. He saw Dr. Chen laughing with Mrs. Patterson. He saw a town remembering how to live. Jake Mackenzie and Captain Dalton stood at the edge of the gathering, not quite together but not quite apart. Henry walked up to them, courage born from the kindness he had received. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting Dr. Chen help me, for stopping the fighting." The two men looked at each other, then at the boy. "You are welcome, Henry," Captain Dalton said. "We should be thanking you," Jake added. "You reminded us what we were fighting for, or what we should have been fighting for. This town, these people, a future worth having. Are you going to keep the peace?" Henry asked. The two men were quiet for a moment. Then slowly, Captain Dalton extended his hand. Jake Mackenzie looked at it, looked at Henry, looked at the town celebrating around them. He took the hand and shook it. "We are going to try," he said, years later. When Henry Clay was grown, he would tell people about the summer of 1872, about the day he got sick and accidentally ended a war. He would talk about how sometimes the solution to impossible problems is not force or strategy, but simple human decency. How we forget that our enemies are people too, until something reminds us Abilene never returned to violence. The gangs dissolved. Jake Mackenzie became the town sheriff. Captain Dalton started a ranch that employed former members of both sides. Dr. Chen and Doc Morrison opened a proper hospital together. And Henry, the orphan boy who belonged to no one, found that he belonged to everyone. He grew up in a town that peace built, in a home that love provided, carrying with him always the carved wooden horse and the memory of the day that hatred paused long enough for humanity to break through. Some said it was a miracle. Others said it was just good timing. But Henry knew the truth. It was not that he saved Abilene. It was that Abilene, when given the chance, chose to save itself. All it needed was one small reason to try, and sometimes one small reason is enough. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more incredible true tales from the Old West. Share Henry's story with someone who needs to remember that hope and humanity can triumph even in the darkest times. Until next time, remember that we are all connected, and sometimes the smallest among us can remind us of the greatest truths.